the start, I would like to say that our country is at this present juncture going through extreme hardship. We all know there is a growing economic crisis. It is growing by the day. The situation is worsening by the moment. As we speak, the situation is deteriorating. And right at the outset, I would like to express my opinion. Whatever support, help, facilitation, peaceful intervention that all of your great countries can make to help Sri Lanka, my motherland, we would appreciate it. We would give our unqualified support at this time of crisis, a very critical juncture in our country's history. We all know the world has gone through tremendous hardship with the COVID crisis. All have undergone their own economic, societal, educational, and health crises. But Sri Lanka's situation is very unique and it's unparalleled because of wrong judgments, incompetence, maladministration, and misgovernance, especially with regard to the macroeconomic management of our country. We are facing crises on several fronts. That is very alarming. Now, the economic crisis has resulted in what you may call a never-ending vicious cycle. It is gaining momentum and it's attempting to go at very high speed. So it may come to an impact, it may come to a situation where it might impact and boomerang and have a multiplier impact on the lives of our people. So approximately 22 million people in our country in all walks of life are suffering. And right at the outset, I would urge fellow member nation states to extend whatever support and help to ensure that Sri Lanka extricates itself from the massive quagmire it is in right now. And from a human perspective, from a humanistic point of view, I think it's time for all to come together and try to ensure that we have stability, that we have sanity, and through the democratic ideals and principles that we adhere to, that we bring about some sense of normalcy to the situation. Because day by day, minute by minute, things are getting out of control. Things are getting out of hand. And the Sri Lankan people are suffering. The people of my motherland are suffering.
Despite that, I think it's late a little bit. But also, as a Palestinian, I will never forget your father's support for us. This deeply in our hearts and in our memory. We wish him to rest in peace. And we hope that through your leadership rule will continue the what your father did regarding the support of Palestine. I'm sorry to speak about my country in this situation, but we are also in a very difficult situation, so we need the help from all. But also as a friend for Sri Lanka, that I'm here now 8 years. I really found this nation a very humble, warm nation that giving the support for our cause from all communities, from all political parties, from opposition side and from the government side. I'm really proud to be this country. As a friend for Sri Lanka, I heard and we read daily about the situation here in Sri Lanka, about the needs for Sri Lanka, the urgency of needs in aspects and spheres and materials that Your Excellency mentioned. But it's very important for us to understand or to hear from Your Excellency and from the leaders of Sri Lanka about solutions. What will be happening in the future? What's the plans? Your responsibility as a leader of Sri Lanka to speak in front of us and to ask for the help, it's a great position, it's a great step, shows how much you are responsible for your people, for your country, and this is really appreciated, especially in this time. But also from our side, it will be interesting if we can hear if there is any plans for a future, how to tackle, how to face this situation. I know that Corona, Ukraine, Russia war, all this situation influence not just Sri Lanka. It's influence everywhere in the world, but here more. There is the currency issue, there is the other economic issue, the productivity of the country, many things. If there is a plan, if there is anything for the future that we can learn and hear from your side. Thank you, Excellency.
We as the opposition, the main opposition, the SJB as we are called, we stand for humanism, humanitarianism, and respect for everyone. Let me remind you that when the present administration embarked on a very unscientific program when it came to the burial and cremation issue, going against WHO guidelines. We were the only opposition, as far as the opposition representing all sectors of Sri Lankan political life, representing all ethnic, religious, and various other communities and groups. We spearheaded the very extremist, racist, discriminatory policy of this government, where they encouraged and promoted and pushed for cremation rather than allowing burials, going against WHO guidelines. We were the first and we were the biggest to come onto the streets and protest. And our pressures reaped rich dividends. And ultimately, the government had to reverse their highly illogical, unintelligent policy position, and now normalcy reigns. So, just before I answer your question, I just thought of expressing those opinions because we have stood by our Muslim communities, we have stood by our Islamic communities, we have stood by all Sri Lankans, irrespective of ethnicity, religion, caste, creed, or any other denomination. You asked a very, very poignant question with regard to the prescriptions and solutions at this particular stage for the major economic crises that we face. Your Excellencies, when we talk of prescriptions and solutions, it's very important to have a comprehensive understanding as to how it all came about. Only when you have a proper understanding, after a very constructive analysis of the source of the problem, can there be a long-lasting solution. So how did the whole thing commence? Your Excellencies, after the presidential election of 2019, the new government went ahead with an extremely huge tax cut. It amounted to approximately 600 billion rupees, close upon 600 billion rupees tax cut. Roughly speaking, 2 to 3% of state revenue, government income, was lost due to that. So, government revenue, which stood at about 11, 12, 13% of GDP, came down to between 9 and 10. And right now, it's hovering around 9 and 10, approximately. So with the loss of government revenue, we had the situation where international rating agencies downgraded our financial ranking. The downgrade of our ratings ensured that Sri Lanka could not enter the international capital markets to obtain dollar loans for refinancing of foreign debt. Foreign debt that roughly, approximately amounts to $52 billion. Virtually everyone in Sri Lanka knew very well that we would be having annual obligations of repaying the capital and the interest, amounting to roughly between 4.5 to 5 billion on an annual basis, the repayment of the 52 billion. So, downgrading of ratings prevented Sri Lanka entering the international capital markets to raise dollar loans, to go ahead with ISBs, so that we could do the refinancing of debt. Now, when that door was slapped closed, we had to, or at least the government took the initiative to use precious reserves to repay the loan and interest payments. When that happened, you had a precipitous fall in our foreign reserves, which would have otherwise been used for medicines, food items, fuel, and so on and so forth. So Sri Lanka had a very healthy reserve position when in the aftermath of the presidential elections, when the government was handed over, I believe roughly along the lines of $7 billion we had reserves. But unfortunately, with the very illogical ad hoc economic decision making, gave vast-scale tax cuts, loss of state revenue, inability to enter the capital markets, inability to refinance our debt and interest, thereby forcing us to use our reserves for loan payments, interest repayments, thereby losing the opportunity of spending the reserves for your vital imports such as fuel, food, and medicines. So now power generation is virtually at a standstill, almost moving towards 10-hour power cuts, and certain areas do have 10-hour power cuts, even though they are not officially announced. So say the people from a variety of areas in our country, the power cuts resulting in the industrial sector having, it has a debilitating impact on the industrial sector, and loss of production, loss of man/woman hours, loss of export markets, inability to provide export items at the correct time, loss of export destinations, and loss of exports means back to square one, lack of dollars. So this is the vicious cycle that I talk about. How do you put a stop to it? Now we come to the prescriptions. I just gave an initial explanation of the major problem. So two things we have to do, which is urgent. Approach the international monetary institutions and also approach nation states to use their good offices to help and formulate a bailout package with the involvement of the international monetary institutions. That is the first step we have to take. Parallel to that, we have to embark on a debt restructuring program. And for that, we have to obtain the services of international financial advisors and eminent lawyers who are proficient in this particular area of debt restructuring. Have a cordial dialogue with those countries and those persons and people who have lent money. Use IMF facilitation to enable and create the environment to arrive at an agreement that does not penalize the Sri Lankan people further, because they are already penalized by the incompetent action, the illogical steps taken by this present administration, without any further penalization or harm bestowed upon the people of our country. We would try to have a win-win package, a win-win agreement, which would once again provide stability, create international confidence, improve the ranking, and enable us to enter the international capital markets, which would allow us to raise dollar loans for refinancing, and that would take care of the debt payments in terms of capital and interest payments, freeing up the reserves for vital needs such as food, medicine, and fuel. So those would be the steps that we would take, and we would have taken. In fact, not now. It's very, very late in the day. We would have taken these steps months and months before. And if I may express my view, that we would have never ever embarked on such an illogical tax cut program, knowing very well that huge amounts and swaths of state income would be lost, and we would have never had a downgrading of our ranking in the international agencies such as Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor, and so on and so forth. So we would not have gone that path. But having said that, we are in this grave situation. It's an unbearable predicament. Our people are suffering. So even in this darkest hour, we have to go ahead with a bailout package with the support of the international monetary institutions, and also go ahead with a proactive debt restructuring program. In addition to that, we would also try to reach out to members of the international community to provide us with whatever support that is possible, purely aimed at achieving these specific targets and nothing else. There are also certain structural inadequacies within our system. We have to have greater women participation in the labor force. I think, roughly speaking, males number 70% and the females number 30%. And for a country that was in the category of a middle income country, but with COVID and the rest, it has now come down to being a low middle income country. Nevertheless, the female participation in the labor force is at very, very low levels. So we have to correct those structural deficiencies. We have to ensure that youth unemployment question is addressed. We have to ensure that ease of doing business in Sri Lanka is facilitated further. We have to move up in our rankings, establish one-stop shops for business enterprises to flourish, to expand, and also new startups. A very forward-thinking, progressive, and I would say out-of-the-box approach to attract foreign direct investments. We need export-led growth. We badly need foreign direct investments to go ahead with that particular program of export-led growth. And we would welcome foreign direct investors and investments to come in, to establish special programs. If I may take you back in time, my father pioneered, when he was the president, the famous 200 garment factory program. He implemented that program, and there were when Sri Lanka was facing wars on two fronts, fronts in the northeast and in the south. And his initiative led to a huge rise in garment exports. And the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European community are the major destinations. And today, Sri Lanka is surviving at least even to this extent because of the growth in the garment industry, which my father initiated. So there are many approaches that we can make. We have to make sure that we eliminate corruption. In terms of the corruption index, Sri Lanka is not in a satisfactory position. We have to ensure that in order to induce and attract foreign investors, we establish one-stop shops and over-the-counter approvals for major investment projects. And this we will do. Way back during my father's time, I believe every Monday of the week, he had a major steering committee meeting. He had the potential investors on one side and the government officials on the other. And he arrived at the discussion. He opened his diary and straight away his one and only action was giving dates for the inauguration of the garment factory. Nothing else was spoken about. So the investors were told, this is the date that I will come for the opening of your factory. Talk to the officials and make sure that everything is in order by that date. So land approvals, infrastructural support in terms of water, electricity, transportation, road system, everything was done. And the factory was also constructed. So there you had the president of the country championing the foreign direct investment program by a very, very simple political management tool. Open your diary and give the inauguration date for the factory. So that's the kind of instrument, political instrument that we would follow. It may not be the same, but we will ensure that the usual bureaucratic, political, and corruption-oriented bottlenecks that hinder foreign investment will be totally and completely eliminated. And we will ensure that corruption is wiped out from Sri Lankan society. So these are some of the prescriptions that we have in place to ameliorate the situation. I'm sorry I had to go to the source of the problem to explain how it all began. And right now, the whole country is yearning for a resolution. We need solutions to these problems. All I can say is, whatever the solution or the prescription is, each and every one of us will have to swallow a very bitter pill. That's a truism. Each and every one of us will have to make sacrifices. But the burden of bearing the most sacrifice should be on the rulers, not the citizenry of our country. The rulers have to make the biggest sacrifice, not the ruled, not the people of our country. I am very confident that we as the opposition possess the requisite personnel, tools, instruments, teamwork, and expertise to bring out this country from this disastrous situation. I remember a few months ago, now I believe it was quite prophetic, I used the word economic Armageddon, and I was very heavily criticized for that. I mentioned about an apocalyptic situation, and I was vilified for that. But right now, people are feeling the pinch. People are seeing economic Armageddon. People are seeing the apocalyptic situation, which I spoke about several months ago. I do understand it's very, very late in the day to take these remedial measures, but it's better late than never. And I think the approach to international monetary authorities and the restructuring of debt is of utmost importance. And it's time that the administration, without fudging the issue, without prevaricating, without hesitating, take the bold step and move forward. I must also mention the fact that Honorable Imtiaz Bahid Marker, who is one of the eminent leaders in our political party, he speaks a lot about all of your great countries, and he has always been a guiding light to me. In fact, he was a minister during my father's administration, and he is a very, very unique and noble politician. I just thought of mentioning that. Because for Your Excellency's understanding and information, we have been calling for an all-party conference all along for the past 1.5 years, and it was never respected. Let me give you one example. We have a Disaster Management Act, which is law, and under that act, whenever there is a disaster situation, there is what you may call a council or a committee that sits, where the opposition leader and members of the opposition are also part and parcel of that committee. Up to now, ever since COVID commenced in our country, the provisions of the Disaster Management Act has not been followed. They've never called for a meeting of this particular committee. So the actions of the government and its inaction in certain areas kind of gave us cause to be concerned about the authenticity of the all-party conference. Even now, when we see the various steps that are being contemplated, why are we delaying? We are delaying the process. People of the country are not informed of the process. We are yet to recruit financial advisors and legal advisors. Everybody is taking a kind of a tortoise speed approach for decision making. It's very lethargic, very lackadaisical. So there are grave question marks as far as the motives of the all-party conference is concerned. What we would do is, if there are genuine attempts to take steps in terms of remedial action to ameliorate the suffering of the people of our country. We wouldn't ask questions, we would give our unqualified support. But everything has to be authentic and genuine. You cannot play political games with the lives of the 22 odd million people that live in our country. One of the purposes of this meeting and talking to you is to urge you all to support us. If we were not constructive or proactive or progressive, we wouldn't do such a thing. We are appealing to the international community to help Sri Lanka in this time of difficulties. We are very genuine in our motives. The purpose of this meeting is also to encourage all of you to try and help us. Those were my first utterances at this meeting. And I would once again reiterate, please do help us, because Sri Lanka needs your help and support in whichever way or form. And I'm specifically talking about power generation, that's energy, food, essential food items, and also medicines and medical equipment.